Welcome to Let's Talk Antigonish, the podcast where we sit down with neighbors, experts, and friends to explore the stories, the questions, and the big little issues that shape life in our town, one conversation at a time. This week, we're talking about the Nova Scotia budget with Jim Bickerton. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Antigonish. It's me, Justin.
And this is Anuj.
And we've got another episode. This time, Anuj, we're going to finally talk about the budget.
The very budget that we have been all talking about but never talked about.
That's correct. We have been trying to get Michelle to come on the podcast these past few weeks.
That is correct.
During the discussion and during the protests, and then ultimately we were not able to secure Michelle. She was we talked
politely declined.
Politely declined with Wendy as she was too busy. So that is something we hope to talk about with our very special guest. Jim Bickerton, Professor of Political Science at St. Francis Xavier University. Hello, Jim, and welcome.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
We're very happy to have you.
Very happy.
So you have been talking a bit about this budget in the news. XFM, I think, interviewed you. Is that right?
Yeah, just briefly on XFM, and I did a couple of other short media things with media elsewhere.
Okay, and why do you think people have been tracking you down about this subject, including us?
Well, I've been around for a long time. I've been a professor of political science at StFX since 1984. And probably my name is out there because I've done a lot of media work over the years.
Okay, so you're not afraid to talk to the media about these things?
No.
Which is great.
I love talking to the media.
But we are not media. We are talking on behalf of Antigonisher.
That's correct. So this is a balancing act we have, which is this is a provincial budget, but we are an Antigonish-based podcast. So we want to know as Antigonishers how it affects us here, which can be difficult to pull the budget apart to say exactly what's going to change. And that's not necessarily your area. You're more knowledgeable about the process. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say the process and the politics surrounding budget making and responses to the budget.
Okay.
Just general kind of political sciencey stuff, I suppose.
Well, I think that will apply because, we do have an MLA from here, so we can talk about that.
And he is an Antigonisher.
And you are an Antigonisher, yeah. So let's get into this. So where are we at? The budget has just passed. Is that correct? So that's it. It's now going to be the budget, the end. The process is over.
Right. And that was even kind of interesting the way it passed, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, we will get to that for sure. So the original budget was like $130 million in cuts.
Right.
For one sector.
Yeah, and then there was a lot of pushback and blowback, and then it was dropped down to $76 million.
They reinstated around $50 million, I think.
So can you talk us through what happened there? The budget came out and people were upset, including people in this town. There was a big protest in this town for
500 people showed up.
Yeah, for in support of the arts, mostly arts and culture.
Yeah.
So what happened?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, obviously it was a record deficit that the province was facing, 1.25 billion roughly, I think. And I think the province had to, when I say the province, I think what I'm talking about here really is the Premier and the Premier's office, and perhaps also the Department of Finance. So we're not talking about everybody in the cabinet even.
Oh, okay.
It's a pretty concentrated process, this kind of decision-making at the end of the day. And they, for two reasons, I think, decided that they had to show some cuts as part of the budget. You couldn't come in with a record deficit and have no cuts. Why? Well, one thing is because of external credit rating agencies.
Okay.
The province needs to borrow a lot of money to finance its debt, which is much bigger than the annual deficit, right?
Right.
And your credit rating is going to determine how much you have to pay in interest in order to borrow that money. So the credit agencies are watching every budget, every provincial budget, and then they're making decisions about whether or not the province is serious about getting its financial act together and reducing the budget going forward.
So you would commonly see that a province would make some cuts just to show the credit agencies that they're playing ball.
Absolutely. Okay. I mean, their biggest fear probably is being downgraded in terms of the credit rating, which could happen if a decision is made that they haven't shown any willingness, to get their fiscal house in order, as they often term it. So, and they would look at the provincial economy to see, whether or not the province could sustain continued budgets. I mean, this year, Ontario had a deficit of close to $14 billion. So imagine that. We're talking about $1.25 billion. Ontario had $14 billion. But then the credit agency looks at the Ontario economy and say, yeah, they can handle that. They can carry that. I mean, you look at the American economy and it's crazy.
Sure.
I mean, it's trillions of dollars in deficits and so on. So Nova Scotia is a different case altogether because it's a small economy, much less diverse and robust in that sense. And so they have to think about that.
Okay.
And the other thing is that only in 2030 reaching a deficit of $810 million, I think, is what they're projecting. So we're talking next year, another deficit over $1 billion. The year after that, another deficit of $1 billion. The year after that, finally getting under $1 billion, but still $810 million deficit. So when you're projecting deficits into the future like that, and you can't even make any cuts now, how are you going to make cuts next year and the year after and the year after? So it's a combination of satisfying sort of external credit agencies and also showing a political willingness to your own sort of people, the province, that we have to start cutting now because we're looking at future cuts. So I think that's just one way of understanding why they did what they did. It doesn't explain why they picked on the sectors that they did.
I do want to get to that, but I'm curious, if you're the credit agency and you're looking at not just the cuts, but what they are using the money for, are you going to look at it more favorably if they're saying we're borrowing this money to invest in some sort of sector that we think will earn money? So are they pulling apart the budget to that extent where they're like,
oh yeah,
okay,
they're pulling apart the budget. There's no question they're pulling apart the budget. And yes, you're right about that. And governments are getting wise to this too. I think they've always been wise to it. But the Carney government, for instance, this year, they made it very clear they were separating out the capital budget, from the rest of the budget, because the capital budget could be more easily justified in terms of it's going to, make the economy more productive and more competitive and, in the future.
Yeah.
So this is an investment.
Got it.
Rather than an expense. So also the province is doing that. They're making sure that, this is capital spending over here. The really big spending items.
Yeah.
Health care is huge.
It is.
By far the biggest item. Education's very large. Infrastructure is very large. Those three are the three biggest. And most of that, or a lot of that, is going to capital spending, right?
And that would the credit people would look at that more favorably.
Oh, absolutely.
So that gets into the question then. Why did they target the things that they did? So essentially it's a lot from arts and culture. Yeah. And personally, within my own sort of friend group, we are speculating as to why this as opposed to other things that they could have cut. Yeah. So what is your take on it from a political sense? Why were those the targets for them in this budget?
Yeah. Well, I think this government has staked a lot of its promises and its reputation on the healthcare system. Reinvesting in the healthcare system, and the money required in healthcare is just nuts. I mean, we're talking about $250 million for the one patient, one record system. We're talking about $1.3 billion. In order to renovate the VG hospital. I mean, these are huge amounts of money we're talking about. So obviously you can't cut there because the government's whole raison d'etre since it was elected was that we're going to do something about healthcare, and yes, it's happening, and we're investing in healthcare, and that's its main.
Yeah, so that was going to be safe.
Plank, yeah. So that was going to be safe. Education, there's growing enrollment in education, because we did have a little bump in terms of population in the province for a few years there. And so now they have to put even more money towards increasing classrooms and teachers and so on in education. And then there's long-term care. Mm-hmm. And that's another big expanse that they're building a whole bunch of new spaces in long-term. There's a lot here that the government could have really emphasized to people in the run-up to the budget in order to prepare them, say, well, we are spending additional funds, significant additional funds in all these important areas that mean a lot to you, you know. So it's kind of strange that they didn't do a better job of that, actually.
I wonder whether
I haven't answered your question.
Yeah,
though,
why
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
why pick on?
So we know
arts.
why they didn't
Those
cut the others.
sectors.
But why was there anything other than arts and culture that they could have pulled out?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I mean, when you look at the budget, I don't know if you guys have taken a look at the budget.
A little bit, yeah.
But the money is sprinkled around everywhere, and that's true of every provincial budget. You know, but the line items, if you go down, I mean, you know, 10 million here, 25 million there, $100 million there, and it's just item after item after item. So there's all kinds of choices that could have been made in terms of where to cut. So why did they decide, you know, the arts community?
Yes.
Is a good question. I'm not really in a position to answer that, to be honest. I think, you know, I think the decision making is so concentrated within the government on this question that a lot of the ministers, cabinet ministers, when they were interviewed about this, it was stunning the degree to which they seemed to be totally out of the know about the reasons why cuts were made here or there. I mean, it was embarrassing to listen to some of these cabinet ministers. They were clearly
not in the loop.
Not in the loop at all.
Okay.
So I think these were the kinds of decisions were probably made at a very high level in the Premier's office. Maybe the Department of Finance would have been involved, but power is so concentrated these days with the Premier's offices and the Prime Minister's office. Our system is highly centralized politically, and I think that you know, I have to ask the question: okay, in that very tight circle around Houston, how much empathy, how much concern, how much knowledge about the local arts community and its contributions was there really? Or did they just see this as an easy area, you know, to cut back on?
I wonder, you know, if I was to propose a hypothesis on this and say that it was probably a almost suicidal move to cut a sector, you know, so it represents 0.69% of the total budget. Just for number's sake, the total budget is 18.9 billion.
Yeah.
130 billion is not even a drop.
Right.
And so, and it can easily get lost in a sub-line item of a budget. Was it a political miscalculation or somebody was not paying? Because it had such huge reaction compared to the total budget. And as you're rightly saying, 35% of the total budget is health and wellness.
Yeah.
3.5 billion is infrastructure. And so, you know, so the question to me is, A, was it a miscalculation and ego at the end of the day that kind of riled up so many people, including people in Antigonish, where we know, you know, everybody agrees that what role art and culture plays in economy and social life, right? Look at our Antigonish, for example. Library budget is being not, added on, for example. So if you can, you know, boil this down to, so A, is Antigonish going to be the net beneficiary of that health investment, that long-term care investment, that education investment, that infrastructure investment? And is that not getting communicated in some way? Or is that money going to be, you know, the budget analysis suggests that a majority of the health budget, the infrastructure budget, may be concentrated in Halifax and Sydney-like cities.
Yeah.
And rural areas may not get the proportionality that they need. So how do Antigonishers understand this? And yes, we want to advocate for art and culture because we so passionately want it. But what is the impact on Antigonish of the larger budget that we should try and understand?
Yeah, I mean, I think the impact on Antigonish in general, I mean, the larger budget is generally positive.
How so?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, setting aside the arts and culture cuts, if you just considered the rest of the budget as it was passed.
So break this down for us. How does Antigonisher benefit from this budget?
Well, it would be in general services that are offered: healthcare services, education services, social services, the infrastructure spending. I think, in fact, the active transportation route through Antigonish is getting a big chunk of money to extend that and expand that. That would be some local thing. So, oftentimes when you see all this money being spent on all these different things, social and economic affairs, and even the bigger culture thing, the film industry got a big bump actually in this budget, the Nova Scotia film industry. But then that's more sort of big picture, glamorous almost kind of aspect, which creates a lot of jobs to make a film in Nova Scotia. So not all arts and culture, got skewered, but it just seems the smaller local programs and grants that they decided they were going to cut, and it didn't give them a big boost either in terms of cutting the deficit.
Yeah.
So I understand what's behind your question in a way, is to why take all this political backlash for the sake of relatively small deficit reduction, and that's definitely a political miscalculation on their part. So I don't know, honestly, how much, if any, real political analysis went into the decisions. I know that the Minister of Finance was put on the mat by journalists about was there any economic analysis done of the impact of these cuts to arts and culture.
Right.
And he was repeatedly asked this question, and he kept ducking it. Which tells me that they did not do any economic analysis of the cuts to arts and culture. But they didn't ask, did you do any political analysis? Right? Journalists never thought about that, but political analysis is sometimes just as key for a government because it's the whole key to their communication strategy.
Right.
And that doesn't seem to have been done either.
Yeah. There's another, just quick follow-up on that. If you read their political statements or principles behind this budget, one of which is they are trying to reduce their government size by 5% every year in the next,
Yeah.
And that's how they are suggesting. And they're saying $1,400 on an average on tax benefit.
Yeah.
And they don't explain how that will pan out for an average person. Is it geared towards older people, younger people with children? And we really don't know all those details of how an average Antigonisher will experience it. So there's a lot of fuzziness.
Yeah, there's a lot of fuzziness. And sometimes these kinds of advertised tax reductions, like the 1% off the HST, would apply, obviously, to everybody who buys anything.
Right.
But wealthier people making more expensive purchases actually are going to get a bigger buyback. But you can't really notice it. I mean, you don't really notice if you're paying 15% HST or 14% HST. Right. It would be, I think, around $26 million more if they had restored the extra 1%. But then they'd be raising the tax, for a conservative government to be raising this tax after they just cut it. Right. Politically, that would be very difficult for them to do that, right? So I think a lot of the tax savings and a lot of the spending be very hard to actually say on a personal level to someone in Antigonish, how's that going to affect your yearly budget? I mean, they would have calculated in general. Sure. A family will save, $240 this year, because of these changes we've made. So I don't have that kind of financial, information that they're working with, but that would be the kind of breakdown you'd get. Yeah.
So if I could play devil's advocate and sort of guess as to what the government was doing, we're sort of in the realm of like, well, maybe they didn't expect this backlash. They didn't do the political analysis. But what if they did, in the sense that they knew perfectly well that cutting arts and culture would annoy some people, not enough to get them, not enough to be a problem at the next election, but more importantly, a signal to someone else of something. And the only thing that I can think of would be that it would be a signal to some external industry that would come in to invest in the province, like oil, gas, mineral extraction, or defense, who has a problem with arts and culture in a political or a social sense. And so they would see a province that's willing to cut arts and culture is sending out a social signal to say, we mean to play ball. We don't want to go down the road of a sort of spending money on arts and culture. We want to invest in oil and gas extraction. Could it have been an external...
Or in an industry
writ large? Yeah. Because Houston, of course, he went down to Texas during the vote. Like he was abroad, I think somewhere in Ottawa or somewhere during some of this debate, courting oil and gas industry. So could it have been some sort of external signal to industry?
I don't think so.
No? Oh, I love that.
I mean,
theory.
it's a nice little conspiratorial kind of take on it. But I kind of find it hard to imagine that oil and gas corporation contemplating billions of dollars of investment could give a shit really whether or not there's $150 million cut for arts and culture.
So
I don't.
They just don't.
I just
care
don't
enough.
think so. No, I just don't think it's in their calculations at all. There's other much more important considerations for them. But why? I mean,
but there is a, just to not to paraphrase what Justin said, but conservatives by their political definition tend to say let's grow the economy rather than do more welfare. There's a general debate on the left and the right, right? And I'm not wanting to go there, but as a community, a society in Antigonish, where we are seeing more people relying on food bank, and affordability is becoming an issue. Jobs are becoming an issue. So what kind of signal are we getting from the budget? Because if you're cutting the services by 5%, by the government services, when you are cutting art and culture, which is the most difficult profession to learn your livelihood on, what kind of signal, and you are investing in the industry, billions of dollars, right? Yeah. What kind of signal are you trying to send?
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, you're right, both of you, in the sense that this particular government, the Houston government, seems to be primarily oriented towards resource-based economic growth.
How so?
Well, in terms of the emphasis, you're talking about him going to oil and gas conventions and energy conventions. My son's a geologist, and he was at the Toronto Oil and Gas Convention that Houston attended.
That was the one I was thinking of.
Yeah, Toronto, but he went to Texas too.
He's just at Texas,
Just at Texas.
During the vote?
Yeah.
And the fracking is back on the radar?
Yep, they're starting to invest in that.
And I don't know how many times I've heard him talk about Wind West and this huge potential, which is years down the road if it happens. But those kind of big ticket items like that really seem to grab this government's attention, Houston in particular. And he does say that this is the key to Nova Scotia's economic future.
It's sort of the trickle-down economics idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. That's true. And I haven't heard him say much about, the kind of small business associated with arts and culture.
Correct.
Side of things, although they lowered the small business tax rate a little bit in this budget. So and conservatives would normally be in favor of small businesses. That's also one of the things conservative parties are often putting an emphasis on.
Correct.
And saying, well, our small business tax rate is now the fourth lowest in Canada, I think is what they were saying. So, the arts and culture community, I honestly don't know if they see the arts and culture community as in an adversarial way, like they're mostly kind of maybe liberal-oriented or left-wing-oriented people.
Is that part of the calculation that because these guys don't vote for us anyways?
Well, it's true. I mean, during some of the discussion, I think either it was Houston perhaps, or maybe the finance minister was saying like, oh, those protests that you saw, those were all NDP organized protests. Right. So they're framing it as which of course, because I was at the arts one here and I'm like, that's incorrect. Yeah. But maybe they are trying to make it political in that sense.
Maybe. But I think they were just genuinely taken aback.
So they miscalculated. Like
I don't think they were the only ones, by the way.
What do you mean?
I think also the other parties were taken aback.
Oh, okay.
Right.
I
they didn't realize that.
No. Both the Liberals and the NDP seemed rather surprised because their first response to the budget really didn't target the personal face of the cuts, and I think they were all kind of taken aback. And in a way, they had to catch up, with the response that was happening and sort of recalculate things. So I think all the parties were a little bit taken aback by it. We're talking about a community which is very articulate, which is good at speaking out. The arts community.
They're good at public speaking.
Yeah, good at public speaking, And I think probably it wouldn't have been predictable how much the public would have also rallied around the arts, local arts community. And I think they have to a certain extent. I haven't seen polls, mind you.
Well, I'm curious. Yeah, there has been no polls about the popularity of the budget, or you're not familiar with anything?
No.
Well, could you then speculate as to what you think? Because there was a bigger reaction than people thought. Maybe it's a miscalculation, or maybe it was a calculation.
Thought out,
but what would you suspect the fallout be for the government or the next election cycle?
The next election is 3 years away.
Far away.
That's what they're playing on.
Is that part of the calculation?
Absolutely.
That's what people are saying.
Absolutely.
Okay. Right.
I mean, you're talking about cuts that are going to go for the next few years. There's going to be cuts to the civil service.
Right.
They didn't say cuts to services, by the way. They said cuts to the civil service.
Correct.
And they will make a distinction between those two things, right?
What is that distinction? I mean,
they would assume that there's always fat to cut in the bureaucracy.
Oh, I see.
We'll manage it through retirements and other kinds of things. So it wouldn't be too bad. But we are looking at cuts and deeper cuts, actually. That is, cuts that will return a little more money to them over the next few years, if their projections are correct. As Anuj said before, these things, they have to update them every year for the next 4 years, and it always changes. And it could change for the worse, as much as for the better. So we might be looking at actually deeper cuts than what they projected. For instance, because of the war in Iran and the energy crisis,
there's so many
variables that could come back to haunt us.
Yeah, I guess we keep saying, between me and Justin, we keep saying this is a podcast that creates conversation. We try and remain politically even-handed. We don't want to get political. In fact, we would love to have Michelle back.
Yeah.
And as our local MLA, as our neighbor, and to really help us explain, what does it mean for Antigonisher, right? and she had come, thankfully she did come, for one of the podcast, and she probably will come again.
Yeah.
But I think, if you can just, as Antigonishers, if you can say a little bit about what is happening in our healthcare right now, given the budget increase, what is happening in our school system, what is happening in long-term care, what is happening in child care. Nova Scotia has not signed up with this $10, per day thing. So, is that, are we seeing the impact for Antigonish or not?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we're seeing increased spending in these areas. Obviously, I think more of this are going to go to bigger urban centers where most of the population growth has occurred. I think Antigonish, to be honest, is quite a nice, privileged little rural community in Nova Scotia. I mean, if I compare Antigonish and our situation in terms of access to things like healthcare and educational opportunities and so on, and then I think back to where I'm from, which is industrial Cape Breton, which includes places like New Waterford and Glace Bay and Sydney Mines, where I was born. And you have a very nice little town here, and you're very fortunate people to have this nice little town with a regional hospital and a university and a good school system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in some ways, Antigonishers in rural Nova Scotia, Antigonish is one of the privileged communities.
We'll be better off.
Yeah. So when we talk about, what is going to be the impact of, these kind of deficits and fiscal restraint, which we're looking at now, fiscal restraint, whereas the budget, the government probably overspent, let's say, during those good years from 2022 to 2025.
Just to interrupt on that, this is not a budget cut budget. Actually, the deficit has gone up this year.
Yeah.
So I think it's misnomer that this is a austerity budget. Actually, it is not.
No.
Right? It's a carefully allocated budget.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's not austerity, but it is fiscal restraint in the sense that they are making some cuts.
Right.
Here we go.
Yeah.
So they have to justify that they're going into a fiscal restraint kind of mode. And look, we've made these cuts, and they were unpopular cuts. I mean, politically speaking, yes, it may be tough for them politically to the domestic audience, but politically speaking, for the external audience that they're concerned about, the politics of it may be good, actually.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
But do you think that people who voted for this party in Antigonish, and they were, would they, given what they are feeling around art and culture sector in the protest, they would remain with them with this emotion?
Yeah.
You don't know.
Who knows? And I mean, this could also be, it could blow over, right?
Right.
It's got 3 years to blow over.
It's got 3
That's a
years to
long
blow
time.
over.
Yeah.
And the majority of people in Antigonish are not involved in the arts and culture community. So it's hard to say.
Right.
It really is hard to say what this means 3 years down the road. And that's the other thing about the way they've approached this, because I think they deserve criticism for the way they've approached it. And they've received a lot of criticism, this government, because I think they have shown an arrogance about the process, a lack of communication strategy in advance, a lack of care in terms of actually identifying with those people who are going to be hurt by this budget. But even the failure to balance that by having a full-on communication strategy about the good things in the budget.
Talk.
Yeah.
Come and talk, yeah.
And I think it's going to be linked to the premier. He has to take the main responsibility because power is so centralized these days with premiers. But connected to that, to this big supermajority that they won in the last election, you could very easily fall into a rather complacent, arrogant approach to things when you receive such a huge mandate as they did in the last election. Partly due to our electoral system, mind you. They get over-rewarded with seats based on how they did, but they clearly did very well. But I think that also probably built in a little bit of complacency about this, and maybe also, Houston's head got a little big, too, as a result of the last election result.
I want to dive a little bit into this process part because I find this a bit fascinating. And I would like to talk about Michelle, who is not here, because we would love to ask these questions directly of her, but she hasn't. So we sort of have to speculate as to what's going on. So what I found interesting, what you said before, was that Houston and the finance minister, they came out with these things, and it seemed to be a bit of a shock to the other ministers even, let alone everyone else in caucus.
Yeah.
So, and I'm wondering what Michelle, as the health minister, would she have been in this group of people who was maybe not part of the inner circle that was thinking about and talking about the budget, so it would have shocked her as well? And what would that, because she didn't come and talk to folks about it. Was she trying to navigate? Would you imagine a scenario in which she wasn't really sure what the messaging was and what her messaging should be? Was she told not to talk to the media? What do you think was going on? We're speculating.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Of course, her portfolio was one of the favored ones.
35% of the budget is in health and wellness.
Yeah. Plus there's big new spending in that portfolio too coming up. So in some ways she wouldn't have been involved in any discussion about cuts in her area.
True.
Yeah, she would have been told, things are going great for you.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously she would have been part of the budgetary process and the fact that, we have all of these spending, upcoming spending in healthcare, and it has to be, itemized and, obviously
You would
used.
expect that to happen.
Absolutely.
She would have been part of those discussions.
Part of those. As Minister of Health, she would have had to have been part of those, and she could speak to those. Like if you asked her to come on and talk about that.
I'm sure she could. Yes, I know she mentioned that
she
before.
would have been here in a minute,
And we would love to have her no matter what.
Yeah, no matter what. But I really don't think that her opinion would have been sought out.
For the arts. I wonder, because the issue being, as Anush has pointed out, this is a very arts and culture heavy town. And you might be right in that most people aren't in that industry, so the political fallout might be minimal. But there's still going to be, and there are very passionate, very upset people.
Yeah.
And so Michelle, I think more so than other locations in the province, is going to have a large number of constituents very upset. So how does this process work for her to interface with the rest of government to to talk about these objections that her constituents are raised. It sounds
Yeah.
like they knew the budget was going to pass. They have a supermajority. It was a done deal. It didn't matter if anyone is complaining. So
Yeah.
what do you think an MLA's responsibility is in that ecosystem?
As a political scientist.
You know, it varies from government to government. Like some premiers and prime ministers have had a reputation for having very good caucus management and very good caucus relations, or very good team approach in terms of their cabinet colleagues, whereas others have tended to be seen as one-person shows or one-man shows. You know, I think Stephen McNeil was actually a bit that way, actually. And it's getting more that way over time, I think.
Here or
it's,
everywhere?
It's more everywhere. It's more unusual now to find that the Mulrooney type who would every day he'd be reaching out to his caucus and making sure people were on side with things. And even when things were going badly, he would always have an ear to the ground. And that proved to be very successful for him. He never had big caucus revolt in the end, despite how badly the government was seen by the general public at the end. I don't get the sense with Houston, like I can't speak with certainty about that, but I don't get the sense with Houston that he is this kind of a manager of his team. He seems to be much more of a one-man show. And I don't know where that leaves Michelle or other cabinet ministers, actually.
Yeah.
Because
they're not going to come on the podcast and express their frustration with the
No.
And
That's
we
not
don't
how it
want
works.
that either. Yeah, so
It would. Well, I would love to hear
Well,
insider
she
knowledge.
couldn't even
but-
break cabinet confidentiality, to be honest. I mean,
Yeah.
like Becky Druin can speak out now because she's gone, she's left, and that puts her in a position to speak out. But for cabinet ministers, cabinet solidarity, cabinet secrecy,
towing the line.
That's rule one, right?
That makes sense. I mean, it's frustrating because we like a peek behind the curtain, and we'd love to have our MLA be seen to make our position known. But that's just not how a government at this time works.
No.
Okay.
It's never how it's worked actually in our system. The
It's
Westminster.
just the Westminster system.
It's the Westminster system,
and so that is normal.
That's normal. But I mean, every government in our system is the government of the premier or the government of the prime minister. They form the government. They hire and fire. It's their government. This is Houston's government, right?
Yeah.
And that's our system.
That's correct.
So they really set the tone,
Yeah.
and they decide what the internal rules are going to be in terms of communication and decision making. That's what I mean. If you want to blame somebody here, you know where the power lies.
And you know, this is not off the topic, but do you think that this is where Canadian system has headed to, including what's happening at the federal level?
Oh, yeah. And it's been that way for a long time.
Right.
It's been that way for a long time.
It's becoming more like that? That's what you were mentioning.
Yeah.
And is that a response to the global geopolitical system? You're dealing with a lot of populist sort of folks.
Right. No, I don't think this is populism. This is just an institutional effect, that our institutions are stacked that way. The power is really concentrated at the top.
Yeah.
And that's the Westminster system, a powerful executive, political executive. And even within the political executive, which is the prime minister and his cabinet, or the premier and the cabinet, even within that, power has become centralized in the leader's office and then the leader.
But,
so cabinet ministers are not as
powerful.
influential as they used to be.
But we I would like to kind of dwell on that some other time with you, of how does that that matter plays out in our local politics, right? Because we are mirroring the similar stuff here when we elect councillors.
Is that
where
accurate? Would you say that the local council, is functioning the same as their other Westminster system?
No.
They feel different to me.
It is different.
And what is the difference?
Like, for instance, already I noticed this is the anniversary of the amalgamation.
Correct.
And they just brought down the budget in Halifax.
Right.
And the mayor voted against the budget that they decided on. Like, the councillors passed a budget that the mayor voted against. So it's a big difference,
So
right?
you will see more dissent. essentially.
Oh yeah,
Or is a more pluralistic.
And there's not the same kind of top-down control.
And they're not even political parties at that level. So maybe that's the difference.
That's certainly one of the big differences. There's no party discipline. No party discipline, and there's not the same amount of centralization of power in the office of the mayor or the senior executive, whoever that might be.
So for Antigonishers, is useful to make that distinction.
Oh yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Anuj, we've been talking a while. Is there any major points we have left? Unfortunately, I have 1,000 questions.
Yeah. But I think, it is fun to have a professor in our podcast who can somewhat dispassionately talk about some of these matters and give us the rundowns.
I think, yeah, and I'd like to say, we're dealing with politics, and that's always going to be a potential sore point. And so, as a podcast, we don't want to favor one party over the other or one ideology. Right. We simply want to uncover the reality of the politics. That's why it's nice having you on, Jim, because you're an academic. You're outside of it, and so I like these kinds of conversations.
Fantastic.
Okay.
But is there anything, I will give you the final word, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think people should know about what's gone down with the budget or what you expect the future to hold when it comes to future budgets?
Yeah. Well, I think the future is probably now. We're in the future. This budget's in the past.
That's true.
And it looks like it's not going to, there's going to be no further climb downs on the part of the government. They've done what they've done, and now they have to go forward with it. So I think the future is of concern because of this projection of future deficits and the need to show continuing fiscal restraint going forward, which means more cuts. And they've kind of indicated that, we're going to focus on reducing the size of government and reducing the civil service and the public service more generally. And oftentimes that's the kind of strategy that will be offered because people think that, they're all fat cats or the government's too big or whatever. And somehow we can have those cuts happen in the future and they won't be as painful for people. But we know.
Interestingly, our Prime Minister is talking
that way. They're doing the same thing.
Which is interesting because that's the large small government thing. That's usually the sort of domain of the conservatives. But now you've got a centrist or left.
Well, and think back. You don't have to think back very far to the Liberal government under Jean Chrétien in the 1990s and Paul Martin. They made much deeper cuts than any conservative government's ever made in Canada. So it's not just a conservative.
Yeah, the
thing.
label doesn't.
No.
The left, right, and center doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, this is great. I feel like this is very helpful. And maybe we'll have to have you back on as our official sort of political correspondent when it comes to provincial politics.
Yeah.
Doug Brown will be our local guy.
Yeah. But both, they actually work as colleagues.
Exactly, yeah.
They're planning in the fall, the Mulroney Institute is planning for Doug and I to have a public talk about Alberta separatism.
Very interesting.
And the referendums that are scheduled in Alberta. Which I think will be very interesting to watch that scene and see what's happening there. So
that is a fascinating and scary discussion. Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for plugging that in.
Okay.
Well plugged. Right. And thanks so much for coming.
All right. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you for listening to Let's Talk Antigonish. If you like the podcast, don't hesitate to subscribe. Just go to letstalkantigonish.ca and click. Voila! You'll receive new episodes right in your email inbox.
This podcast is a labor of love. Please consider making a contribution, small or large, maybe a monthly subscription.
A thank you to all of our supporters and subscribers, especially our paid subscribers through the Substack. You are really helping us to keep this podcast going, and we look forward to expanding it in the future. Let's talk, Antigonish.